A guards red Porsche with a manual transmission fitted with the largest flat six the company makes that is mounted in the middle of the car. Perhaps I'm taking a stab in the dark here, but today, it ain't gonna be a bad day at the office. In our recent 718 Spider episode, I shared with you that this engine, the exact same engine, a 4-liter flat six that is naturally aspirated, is both A, very important, and B, not a detuned GT3 engine. You can check out that episode for all those details. However, a couple of the high points. 414 horsepower and 309 pound-feet of torque comes in at 5,000 to 6,000 RPM. Now, there are two finer points I did not cover. The first is the direct fuel injection system on this gasoline-powered car. The fuel injectors themselves are piezo injectors, a very fancy name that I may be butchering, that is short for piezoelectric. And you may be familiar with those because those are the injector types that are used in modern-day diesel cars. And the reason why they use them in diesel applications is because they run at a much higher pressure. For example, usually 5 times the pressure of a regular injector in a gasoline-powered car. Now that leads to the second finer point, which is an adaptive control system that enables the engine to switch off cylinders under low load circumstances. Not entirely a new trick, but where other applications do it through the timing or other means, this system does it by interrupting those injectors under low load circumstances. Now, how does this impact performance figures? Well, VMAX, 188 miles an hour, a whopping 1 mile an hour faster than the convertible, and 0 to 60, 4.2 seconds. Now, beyond that, I have some very good news to report. This is currently on offer only with a 6-speed manual. The next bit of information, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but next year, I believe Porsche is going to be offering this with a PDK. With that, there is still the same delivery of linear power, which is highly unusual for flat sixes and flat fours, especially one that is not turbocharged, which is what makes this, not just this engine in this car, but this engine family work so well. It's usually, you gotta wring the neck of these things to get them to provide any kind of power like this. And it works so beautifully in this application with the engine in the middle of the car. Me personally, I'd rather have the convertible for no other reason than the oral sensation. You're that much closer to the exhaust, which is phenomenal in these cars. As with the 718 Spider, I would argue this is much more about the suspension setup than that engine. Yet that engine certainly aids the suspension setup, if you get my drift. So what makes it so special underneath? Well, there are a number of moving parts. This car is not fitted with Sport Chrono, yet it is fitted with active transmission mounts as standard. Then the wheels, 20-inch diameter as standard, same as the Spider. Even the design is the same as the Spider, but what changes is the finish. This is satin platinum as opposed to silver. Then there are the brakes. Now, you and I could argue about the merits of carbon ceramic rotors on Porsches, which are optional here. However, these are fitted as standard with steel rotors that are 380 millimeters all the way around, more than adequate. As a basis of comparison, a 992 Carrera S, that's 350 mils all the way around. Then there's the suspension setup itself. Now, most people would look at this as a street car. Some would look at this as a track car. And as such, Porsche has blessed it with manual adjustments for toe, camber, ride height, and anti-roll bar settings. Yet it still is a Porsche, so it has PASM fitted to standard, but it's a specific PASM for the GT4 and the Spider in that the ride height is 30 mils lower than a standard Boxer or Cayman. There is really only one way to describe this vehicle, and that is the reference point or the gold standard for other OEMs to compare their efforts in how to make a sports car drive like a sports car. Yeah, I could go on and on and on about no pitch, squat, dive, and roll, but it's more than that. It's more than the sum of its parts. All the stuff we have discussed between this and the Spider, it's so magically perfect going around these kind of roads, but more importantly, you know what? Let me show you something. You don't have to go fast for this thing to be special. That's what makes this so special. You know, there's the old, I'd rather do the slow car fast rather than the fast car slow. That's old hat, we all know that. this is something completely different. This is the intersection of a perfect balance of driving dynamics, but not at the expense of ride quality. Like, we come around this turn here, and it's not a perfect turn. I got a dip here, and I don't literally lose my intestines as I'm doing that. Active hour is broken up into two segments, the bits that are sort of shared with the Spider and the bits that are improvements over the previous gen GT4. The overall impact is an increase of downforce by 50%. Looking at the front of the vehicle, that's where it's sort of shared with the Spider. The most obvious is that vent that sits in front of the frunk that's been pilfered from the GT3. Then looking underneath the vehicle, that's probably the biggest change and has something to do with the Sport exhaust, in that they've reframed the diffuser, which runs almost the length of the entire vehicle, and the logic is to better channel the airflow underneath the vehicle, and that accounts for almost 30% of that improvement in downforce. Then there's the wing, which is still manually adjustable. It's been changed, reshaped a little bit, and that provides 20% of the improvement in downforce. Then specific to the GT4 are side vents that have been reshaped for this generation. So a bit of an interesting fun fact here. This is a hardtop. The last time we drove one of these was a convertible. And usually there's quite a weight difference between these two vehicles. Here, the total weight difference is 7 pounds. So there is another tiny secret about these things. The interaction between the car and the driver is unique here, not because of all of the things we have discussed thus far. It's the two biggest input points that change, the shifter and the steering wheel. The shifter is just under an inch shorter, and the steering wheel, this is the Sport diameter steering wheel, seen as optional in other Porsches. These are not things you would notice right off the bat. You got to take some time with the car to really understand the differences, but it's kind of like the proverbial onion. Once you spend more time with it and you peel back the layers, that's when you're like, oh, you know what? These little changes do make a huge difference. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game of mine, the options game. You know what? We said magnificent for the 718 Spider. Why don't we call this one a return to classic Porsche sports cars in a rather glorious way? The 2020 718 GT4 for a base price of $99,200. To that, we add the reason why I would call it a classic Porsche sports car. That color is called Guards Red. If you are familiar with most mid-80s 911 SCs, they were also Guards Red for $0. To that, we add black standard interior that is also finished in Alcantara, that also has silver stitching, contrast stitching, that is $0. Even down. To that, we add 2-zone climate control, $770, a smoking package. I've told you this many times. I like cigars, but I wouldn't smoke them in my car, $0. Apple CarPlay is optional on a $100,000 car, $360. Can we fix that? Full bucket seats, wow, $5,900. We will talk more about those later. Auto dim mirrors with rain sensor, $700. Navigation, optional on a $100,000 car. That is almost, actually more than 2% of the base price, $2,320. If we already paid for Apple CarPlay, do we really need navigation? And then first year of maintenance, 10,000 miles, $0. The only thing we have to add beyond that is destination handling, $1,350 for a total retail price of $110,600. Did I mention it's Guards Red? A note about the seats. They are magnificent if you are tracking this vehicle, and I wouldn't track a $100,000 car. That's what a Spec Miata is for. But I do know someone who actually did. They sold a 993 Turbo, magnificent low mileage car, and they bought this to track it. You know what? Rather than me weighing on this, comments below. Did he make a smart decision or did he make a foolish decision? But that aside, using this thing around town, I would argue these are the wrong tools for the job. And it's not just the usability, they are a pain in the ass to get in and out. And I am a distance runner, I usually do not complain about these things. But then there's the actual cost. They're almost $6 grand. $6 grand could go to many other options on these cars. $6,000 would be 60% of a good spec Miata race car. Anyway, just saying. And now for a bug in your head. This, the 718 GT4, is by far the best bang for your Porsche sports car dollar. Yes, an entirely bold claim, but follow me for a minute here. In the options game, we learned that this one, it doesn't have many, and I would argue most of those you don't need. The only must-have is Apple Carplay, which shouldn't be optional on a $100,000 car. But we'll roll with it anyway, and it still comes in at under $100,000. Well, just barely. But more importantly, look at the delta either way. You go down, a well-equipped Boxster or Cayman is not much cheaper than this. You go up, a well-equipped 992 is way more than this. Yet this, as we have learned in this episode, it is magnificent to drive, and one could live with it every day. Now, why this over the 718 Spider? Yes, I prefer convertibles, but you do need the special interior and you do need the two-tone top to make that car really pop. This, it's all about picking the right standard color, which someone has done here, and perhaps a better standard interior. Now that we understand each other, one slight challenge with that statement. You see, in September, you and I are going to drive something called a 718 Boxster GTS 4.0. I'll let you do the math on what engine it has, but suffice to say, it has just a little bit less horsepower than this one, so we may have to revisit this whole best bang for the Porsche sports car dollar question. Until then, don't ever tell me I never help you.